Have you been playing KDA wrong? As in, have you been placing your Seraphine in the backline instead of the frontline where she performs far better? In the front, Seraphine casts far more often and she constantly heals herself and your frontline, which buys time for Akali and your other spellweavers to scale. And with Hextech, Gunblade, Rabadon and jak'sho all seeing sizable buffs, this comp will be far stronger going into patch 14.1. Frontline Seraphine transforms the way you play KDA because KDA severely lacks frontline by only having Neeko and Lilia. And Lilia's only a 1 cost, so she's not that great. But this video will prove that Seraphine belongs in the frontline. But why does Seraphine perform so well in the frontline? What are Seraphine's best in slot items, and why am I expecting nerfs to this comp? Before we get into that, remember to subscribe. And I've just started a new Discord, which I'll link in the description, but I'll talk more about this later. So, as I mentioned, Seraphine heals herself constantly in the frontline. But why are Seraphine's heals better here than if she was in the backline? Well, that's because of how her ult targeting works and how she'll target the largest clump of units. So if you frontline Seraphine and surround her with units, then she's far more likely to ult herself and your other frontliners. And this is also why you always want Headliner Seraphine, because her Headliner bonus makes her do more damage and healing. KDA also gives Seraphine a surprising amount of HP, so she is quite tanky. Now, I will say that you always want to make sure there's always tanks either side of Seraphine so she doesn't take focused aggro. While she will be tanky, there's no way she can out-sustain the focused aggro and damage of the entire enemy board. That's why I find it so necessary to put all my tanks and Seraphine in the first row with Seraphine in the center, so my tanks take all the aggro from the enemy carries, while Seraphine's only getting hit by the enemy tanks. That way, she'll generate mana without taking too much damage. But of course, that means that if the enemy carry is in the center, then you may need to move Seraphine away. But this can be awkward in some KDA hex variations because sometimes you can get some really bad hexes, which means that many of your units won't benefit from KDA at all. I wouldn't play Frontline Seraphine in these really bad KDA variations because you lose a lot of power from KDA. So this comp can be unplayable in some games just due to which KDA hex variation you got. But generally you can put Echo and Kennen beside Seraphine if there are no KDA hexes there because they're not KDA, so you're not losing that much. Anyway, another benefit to frontlining Seraphine is that she generates way more mana this way. That's both through tanking damage but also jak'sho giving her more mana when she's struck by an attack. On the other hand, the reason why items like Shojin and Nashus aren't that great on Seraphine is that her base attack speed isn't very high. So even with these items, it takes her a while to cast as she needs to auto for mana. But of course, Seraphine's attack speed isn't a problem if you're frontliner. Also, as I mentioned, KDA doesn't have much frontline, but that also applies to Spellweaver. So being able to frontline Seraphine bolsters your overall board strength tremendously, especially with those heals to your other frontliners. In both KDA and Spellweaver, frontline Seraphine stalls the combat for longer, which allows your Spellweaver units or Akali to scale a lot more. And yes, Akali does scale because she'll dash through every unit she's marked with her ability. But the last and best reason is that frontline Seraphine is very straightforward to play. This is the comp you play where you get Headliner KDA, where you just play vertical KDA. And the reason why I like this board is that Seraphine has far more HP on this board, which means that she's tankier, especially with jak'sho. More HP means that Seraphine can tank more, cast more, and heal more. But if you get Headliner Spellweaver, then you can play this board instead, which is nice because Lulu also has some CC and Hyperpop is getting buffed in 14.1. And at 5 Spellweaver, both Ahri and Lulu will be outputting far more damage. But I personally prefer the KDA version because overall the board is just far tankier. But both comps are very similar in the sense that your main tanks are Echo, Neeko and Seraphine, and your main damage dealers are Ahri and, well, Seraphine. And when you're rolling for Seraphine at levels 6 and 7, you can also aim to 3-star other units. For example, if you're playing the KDA version, you can aim to 3-star KDA units like Neeko and Kai'Sa, who will do more damage and be tankier through KDA. Or if you're playing Spellweaver, then you can aim to 3-star Spellweavers like Echo and Lulu. Now what I will say is Lulu 3 is incredibly strong, especially in patch 14.1 where she's seeing many buffs. Although despite Kai'Sa also seeing buffs, she still does not feel very impactful when you play vertical KDA. So I wouldn't really recommend itemizing Kai'Sa over other KDA units like Akali and Ahri. Regardless, with whichever variation you're playing, you will now have so much more frontline when you play Seraphine like this, and that means your actual backline units have much more time to scale and dish out damage. But because there's so much overlap between these comps, the items you make and the augments you take are the same for both comps. Speaking of, now let's talk about the items. So of course I've mentioned it a lot, but you build jak'sho on Seraphine because that's both her mana generating item and her tank item. But what are her other items? Well, since Seraphine will be a headliner and KDA already has 2 superfans, you may as well dip into superfan for a free item on Seraphine. And in this case, that item is Rabadon. Now, Rabadon is getting a very large buff in 14.1, where it will give loads more bonus damage. This is huge for Seraphine because she already has loads of AP from both Spellweaver and KDA, but she lacks a damage amplifier. So this new Rabadon is amazing for Seraphine because of how much more damage it will give her. But of course, more damage doesn't necessarily mean more healing, so how do we fix that? Well, that's through Hextech Gunblade. Hextech Gunblade allows you to double dip with Seraphine. Not only is her ult innately healing, but also all of her damage will be converted into extra healing through the item. And with the additional cast from Seraphine's headliner bonus, that's even more healing, damage, and healing. This maximizes Seraphine's healing potential, and in the cases where Seraphine doesn't ult herself, she still has some backup healing. And in the cases where the enemy board has backline access, Hextech Gunblade will also allow Seraphine to heal your backline and keep them alive. So these three items have incredible synergy together with Seraphine's ult and enable her as a frontline unit. But are there any alternatives to these items? Well, yeah. jak'sho can be replaced with Crown Guard, and Hextech Gunblade can be replaced with Bloodthirster, especially with its AP buff in 14.1. But while these items are individually okay alternatives, the lack of mana generation from Crown Guard and the lack of ally healing on Bloodthirster makes the combination of these items extremely suboptimal for frontline Seraphine, and I would not recommend them at all. I believe it's jak'sho, Hextech Gunblade, and Rabadon, and nothing else. These items are just too good for Seraphine. And I should also mention that you should get MR Shred so Seraphine can deal more damage and heal more through Hextech Gunblade. I'd recommend a Spark on Echo, Nico, or you can place a Spark on Kennen and place him behind Seraphine as Kennen has 2 range. Also, Spark is getting a great buff next patch, so don't worry about building it. Alternatively, of course, you can build Shiv on Lulu. But with that covered, I'll briefly mention some great augments. Generally, Seraphine wants more damage and tankiness. Flat HP is great because KDA will scale that up as well. So those are HP augments like Cybernetic Bulk, Cyber Implants, etc. But I should highlight to remember your roots because most of your board will benefit from that HP and attack speed. Your standard damage augments are great like Jeweled Lotus, Know Your Enemy, Contagion, etc. Of course, reroll augments are nice too because there's so many units you can 3-star in both comps. Another great augment is Healing Orbs for loads of burst healing. Any CC immunity augments are great too to keep Seraphine casting, and Talent Surge is great for your entire board to get their headliner bonus. I'll also mention Hologram, which is great for another Seraphine that you can frontline. Even though this extra Seraphine won't have any items, she'll have way more HP than your itemized Seraphine, which is then further increased by KDA. These Seraphines will ult the same clump of units, which will usually be them because you want to put these two Seraphines together. But lastly, I should mention one of the best augments for this comp, which is fully adaptive because not only do you get a free jak'sho, but also that jak'sho will be far more powerful on Seraphine. Now, I will admit that I haven't tested every augment on frontline Seraphine because there's so many augments in set 10, but if you do find any interesting combinations or you have any questions, let me know in the comments. But as I mentioned in the intro, I do eventually think that this comp will get nerfed. But why? Well, as you've probably noticed by now, but in recent sets, TFT is steering away from units that are solely supportive units. For example, both set 9 and now set 10 don't have any units that solely do healing. Don't get me wrong, this is a great change because these support units were generally never itemized because why would you ever want to? But now in set 9 and set 10, support units have more damage in their kits and in turn less healing. And that's why I think Seraphine will get nerfed. The devs are steering away from units that provide so much healing because they prolong combat far too well, and it's very frustrating when you're playing against a board with insane heals. So because Seraphine's heals are so ridiculous, I am expecting a substantial reduction in that healing. And maybe they'll counterbalance that by giving Seraphine more damage and attack speed. So play this comp while you can, because if Seraphine is nerfed like that, then this comp is dead. And I think that mostly covers everything. But of course, let me know if I missed something or if you have any questions. I do think this will be viable in ranked, especially in the next patch. I mean, Aubrey has already had a lot of success with it, which I'm very happy about. But when I tried to force it, it didn't really work out so well, so yeah. Regardless, I'm looking forward to playing Frontline Seraphine in the next patch, and I know many of you feel the same way. Speaking of, I've been loving the feedback and the stories from you guys about the comps I've made. So I've recently started a Discord thanks to the help of Camo, and in that Discord I've made a channel called Success Stories where you guys can post images and links about the games you've played with my comps. So if you play any of my comps and enjoyed them, join my Discord and let me know because that will make me very, very happy. The next video will be about a broken Lulu reroll comp in the next patch, so look forward to that. But yeah, now I'll pass over some questions to you guys. What do you think of Frontline Seraphine? Will you play it? If you did, how did it go? And do you think this comp will get nerfed? Let me know in the comments and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me, and as always, thank you for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.